My heart pounded beneath layers of crushing pressure, and every breath tasted like it could be my last. In that final moment of descent, I realized I had gone too far, and there was no coming back. My name is Sheck Exley. I left my life behind in the bottomless depths of Zacaton, chasing a record that never let me surface. For most of my life, I was known not by fame or fortune, but by a single obsession: depth. Not the kind you measure in words or wisdom, but in feet and atmospheres in the cold, crushing silence beneath the earth. I wasn't just a cave diver. I was a cave diver, as I was the first in the world to log over 1,000 cave dives at the age of 23. In 29 years of cave diving, I made over 4,000 dives. From the limestone caverns of Florida to the underwater labyrinths of Mexico, I made my name one dive at a time. My approach was never reckless. In fact, I was known for my meticulous planning, my caution, my belief that any mistake underwater could be your last, and often was. But I was also driven by something deeper than reason. There was a part of me that believed the most profound truths weren't found in books or in speeches, but in the places where few dare to go. By the time I reached my mid-30s, I had already survived dozens of dives that could have easily killed me. I had mapped the unknown, written the safety manuals, and mentored countless divers. Yet still, the questions haunted me. How deep could man truly go? What waited at the very bottom of the world's deepest sinkholes? In 1994, I set my sights on the most dangerous and mysterious site I had ever encountered: Cenote Zacaton, in the Mexican state of Tamaulipas, a flooded volcanic sinkhole so deep its bottom had never been reached by a human being. I wasn't going there just for a record. I was going because Zacaton was the last great question left unanswered in my world, and I couldn't live with questions. Zacaton wasn't just another dive site. It was a phenomenon. Tucked away in a remote volcanic region of northeastern Mexico, this cenote had defied explanation for years. Unlike the clear, inviting springs of Florida, Zacaton was shrouded in mystery. Its waters were warm, murky, and mineral-rich, an opaque green veil that swallowed light and gave nothing back. There was no visibility past a few feet, no guiding line from previous dives, no room for error. But it wasn't the water's color or composition that made Zacaton legendary. It was its depth. At the time, estimates varied wildly. Some thought it went 800 feet. Others whispered of depths over 1,000. NASA had even shown interest, using robotic probes to study its geothermal environment, hoping it might mimic conditions on other planets. That alone says something about the place. Zacaton didn't just test human limits. It flirted with the extraterrestrial. For a diver like me, it was the ultimate test. I knew the dangers. Everyone did. In fact, me and my friend Jim Bowden had spent months preparing for a record-breaking dual descent into Zacaton's depths. We planned to descend in parallel, side by side, each carrying an array of tanks with different gas mixtures to handle the crushing pressures and risks of nitrogen narcosis, oxygen toxicity, and carbon dioxide buildup. Every stage had been calculated down to the minute. We had backup plans for our backup plans. And yet, there was no guarantee of success. Not in a place like this. The deeper you go, the more your body turns against you. At just 100 feet, nitrogen begins to make you feel drunk. At 300 feet, oxygen, normally life-giving, can become poisonous. Past 500, every breath you take has to be carefully engineered. Zacaton demanded more than skill. It demanded that you surrender the illusion of control. And I was ready to make that surrender. The days leading up to the dive were filled with meticulous preparation. Jim and I had studied everything we could about Zacaton: the terrain, the underwater geology, the precise characteristics of the water that would meet us at each depth. The dive wasn't just about reaching the deepest point. It was about surviving the journey down and back up. Every variable had to be anticipated, and I knew that even a small mistake could cost me everything. We set up our base camp near the entrance of Cenote, a rough-hewn area that had everything we needed: tanks, gauges, safety gear, and a small crew to monitor our dive. The first day was spent checking, and rechecking equipment. I had my gas mixture prepared. Trimix with deep stages, a blend of oxygen, nitrogen, and helium to prevent nitrogen narcosis at depth. At 700 feet, my breathing gas would switch to a high helium content to avoid oxygen toxicity. In diving, nothing is ever as simple as it seems. Your gear isn't just a tool, it's a lifeline. The sheer weight of the tanks, the weight of the wetsuit, the weight of the responsibility. Everything felt amplified in the shadow of Zacaton. I could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on me. Even in the calm of our campsite, a sense of unease lingered like a low hum beneath the surface. I had done thousands of dives, but this was different. This wasn't just about skill or experience. Zacaton demanded an understanding of nature's raw power, an acknowledgement of how fragile human life could be in the face of such immense depth. The deeper you go, the less room there is for error. I knew this, but there was still that unshakable feeling, the call of something bigger than myself. The morning of the dive arrived with oppressive heat, the sun beating down on the land and adding to the atmosphere of tension. We suited up and checked in with the crew. It felt like an ordinary dive, but inside, I could feel the enormity of the situation weighing on me. Jim and I exchanged glances. We both knew that what lay ahead was dangerous, but neither of us was willing to back down. Not now. We entered the water slowly, each movement deliberate. I descended first, Jim following closely behind. The feeling of sinking into the unknown was indescribable. With each meter that passed, the world above faded away. The temperature dropped as we descended, the murky green water enveloping me like a thick fog, and I adjusted my buoyancy to keep me steady. At 300 feet, the world grew darker. The visibility was non-existent, a dense curtain of blackness wrapping itself around me, erasing any sense of orientation or depth. The beam of my dive light sliced through the water like a sword through velvet, but even its strongest setting could barely reach beyond a few feet. I moved slowly, deliberately, watching every inch of guideline, every flicker of bubbles rising toward a surface I could no longer picture in my mind. Zacaton was unlike any cave I had ever explored. Its silence was oppressive, not peaceful, and endless, echoing stillness that made even the gentle hiss of my regulator feel thunderous. The limestone walls had long since vanished from view, leaving me suspended in a vertical tomb of darkness, deeper and more consuming than any ocean trench. The further I descended, the more the water pressed in, dense and cold, as if the earth itself wanted to keep its secrets buried forever. By the time I reached 500 feet, I was no longer just diving. I was navigating the edge of human capability. The effects of pressure were beginning to manifest. Each breath required more effort. My limbs moved a fraction slower. I was acutely aware of the risk of high-pressure nervous syndrome, an affliction that could come without warning, bringing tremors, confusion, or worse. But I had trained for this. I had descended into pits and caverns across the globe. I knew my body. I knew my limits. Or at least, I thought I did. At 600 feet, time seemed to dissolve. I couldn't tell how long I had been falling through the water column. My dive computer told me minutes, but in that black void, it felt like hours. Every second demanded attention. Every breath had to be carefully measured. The trimix mixture, oxygen, helium, and nitrogen, kept me conscious, kept me focused, but it was no safety net. One misstep, one failure in the chain of equipment or judgment, and there would be no forgiveness. The guideline, my only connection to the surface world, pulsed gently in the dim light. I checked it constantly, touching it with gloved fingers as though seeking reassurance. At this depth, even a moment's disorientation could mean drifting into blackness with no way back. I moved cautiously, descending in tight spirals along the line, conserving energy, mindful of every motion. By 750 feet, the weight of the dive, not just physically, but mentally, began to settle in. My body was working overtime just to exist here. The gas density made every breath denser, heavier. Small decisions required more thought. A wrong calculation could cascade into catastrophe. And still I pressed on. This was what I came for, not the thrill, but the pursuit of a new frontier. I had studied Zacaton for years. I believed its deepest secrets still lay ahead. But the cave was not a willing partner. It did not give itself up easily. As I passed 850 feet, my dive computer continued to log the descent. I was aware that Jim Bowden, descending nearby on a separate line, had already started to slow. We weren't diving side by side, but we were linked by purpose, by a shared mission to reach where no one had gone before. And yet, down here, we were utterly alone. There were no signals, no lights, just two divers, hundreds of feet apart, alone in a black vertical abyss. Then came 900 feet. At this point, I was deeper than any cave diver had ever been in Zacaton, and possibly anywhere on Earth. My dive computer read 906 feet. I hovered, breathing slowly, feeling the full weight of pressure and history around me. I checked my gauges. Everything looked normal. But even then I knew this was the edge. There would be no pushing further today. And then something changed. Not a sound, not a jolt, but a feeling. It began subtly, an unease that crept in like cold through a cracked window. I had experienced deep dives before. I knew the sensations of narcosis, of pressure, of physiological strain. But this was different. My hands, steady just moments before, began to tremble. A fine vibration settled into my limbs, not from fear, but from something deeper, something biological. It was a kind of tremor that hinted at systems slipping out of sync. At first, I thought it might be nitrogen narcosis, but the gas mix I carried was calculated to mitigate that. Then I wondered, could be HPNS? High-pressure nervous syndrome had always been a known risk. It's a cruel twist of nature, affecting divers at extreme depths when they're most vulnerable. Symptoms include tremors, dizziness, confusion. All fatal liabilities are far below the surface. I had studied it. I had prepared for it. But no preparation can truly brace you for its subtle arrival. I tried to steady my breath, to focus on the line and the plan. Ascend slowly, control the pace, stick to the decompression schedule. But now, my thoughts were beginning to fog. I was aware of time slipping. Not minutes, but moments, tiny lapses in focus. It was as if the cave itself was folding around me, whispering that this was far enough. And then I looked at my hands. They were no longer shaking. They were still, but I hadn't told them to stop. Something in me, perhaps a deeper instinct, began to understand. I wasn't improving. I was shutting down. The balance I had so carefully maintained between mind, body, and machine was tipping. I remember thinking very clearly, this could be it. I reached for the guideline, still intact, still leading up into the darkness above. I turned slowly and began my ascent. The water, thick and crushing, resisted every motion. Every breath was a battle between willpower and physics. I rose carefully, hand over hand, retracing the line that had brought me here. But something was wrong. The tanks on my back were heavier now. My movement felt restricted. I checked my gear. Everything seemed normal, but there was a tightness around the valves. I reached back and felt it. The guideline, it was wrapped around my tank. Deliberately, methodically, and I knew what it meant. At that moment, everything slowed. My mind, clouded just minutes before, cleared with chilling precision. I recognized the pattern of the line around my valves, not tangled in panic, but methodically looped. It was a kind of configuration a diver uses when they know they're not coming back, to prevent anyone from risking their life trying to retrieve a body from an unreachable depth. I had seen it before. I had even taught it, and now it was on me. Some part of me, maybe the deepest, most rational part, had accepted what was happening before the rest of me caught up. Perhaps in the haze of HBNS, in the quiet chaos of failing systems and internal pressure, I had made a decision, a final one. There was no sign of physical trauma, no malfunction blaring alarms, no catastrophic failure, just the overwhelming weight of the deep. No screams, no struggle, just the infinite pressure of the earth itself, wrapping tighter and tighter around the limits of human ability. I don't remember slipping away. There was no grand moment, no farewell, only darkness. They found my body not far from the guideline, at a depth of around 879 feet. My dive computer recorded a maximum depth of 906 feet, far from our original target of 1,000 feet, but still deeper than nearly any diver had ever reached in a cave. This was supposed to be a dual descent. Jim Bowden and I had planned it meticulously, with staggered timings and carefully calculated gas mixes. But not long into the dive, Jim noticed something was off. His gas consumption was higher than expected. Recognizing the danger, he made the difficult but wise decision to abort his dive and ascend. I continued. He surfaced alone, unconscious for a short while, unaware of what had become of me, and I had disappeared into the black silence of Zacaton. The team on the surface waited as the minutes stretched far beyond our estimated return time. When I didn't come back, they knew. Eventually, after a cautious and painstaking search, they found my body. The line was looped securely around my tank valves, a detail some interpreted as intentional, perhaps a signal to avoid risky recovery attempts. There were no signs of trauma. My breathing equipment was intact. There was no mechanical failure. To this day, the cause of my death remains uncertain. Some believe high-pressure nervous syndrome played a role, magnifying stress and impairing my judgment. Others suggest that nitrogen narcosis, intensified by the extreme depth, clouded my thoughts. But perhaps, in the crushing stillness below, I simply understood. I had reached the limit. In the time that followed, my name echoed through the diving community. Some call me a legend, others call me a warning. But I hope they remember that I didn't dive for records. I dove for truth, because to explore is to risk, yes, but also to believe in what lies beyond. Let my last dive remind you of this. The deep is beautiful, but it is not ours. It is a place that demands reverence. And when we forget that, even for a moment, it takes everything. I left my life in Zacaton, not with fear, not with regret, but with the same resolve that had guided every step of my journey. Some mysteries aren't solved. They are endured,